I was working part-time for the Jersey Coast News Company in the morning, early morning. And word got out that there's a cruise ship off Seagirt on fire. And people were jumping overboard, swimming in. Some of them were picked up by the Coast Guard. Some of them had already perished. Early that morning, word got out that the Morro Castle has been beached at the convention hall. So we had school that day, and nobody went to school. We played hooky, and we all went down to see the Morro Castle during the school hours. All the stores that closed right immediately after Labor Day opened up for business. Hot dog stands, ice cream, souvenirs, whatever you want to do. And there we were on the north side of the convention hall on the boardwalk watching the Morro Castle bobbing and weaving. No one could get on the ship because it was still smoldering. That heat that came from the Morro Castle, we felt it right on the boardwalk. And it was a beautiful September 8th day.
This year, 2009, commemorates the 75th anniversary of the Morro Castle disaster. The Morro Castle disaster was one of the most important events in American maritime history. The Asbury Park Historical Society is extremely honored to dedicate the first ever monument to the Morro Castle disaster. The monument not only recognizes the great loss of life, but also honors the first responders along Monmouth County that risked their own lives to go out and save people from the rough seas or to bring the dead to shore so that their loved ones could eventually come and identify them.
On Saturday, September 1st, 1934, the Morro Castle sailed from New York, bound for Havana, Cuba. Aboard ship were 555 souls, 331 passengers, and 224 crew. Many were vacationers looking forward to 7 happy days at sea and in the semi-tropics of Cuba. This voyage of the Morro Castle was a pleasure cruise. The following Saturday morning, almost within sight of New York Harbor, fire was discovered. At 3:25 Saturday morning, the startling SOS that told the amazed world that this great boat was a flaming furnace went on the air. With almost incredible rapidity, the fire swept this proud liner from bow to stern. The agony that was suffered, the despairing struggles to escape the flames will never be fully realized by those who were not there to witness the awful tragedy. Added to the fire was the terror of one of those hurricane-like storms that often sweep the Atlantic coast. The state convention of the American Legion being held at Belmar turned its attention to aiding survivors and cooperating with police and relief agencies. Over 1,000 of the male members of the convention patrolled the beaches between Asbury Park and Point Pleasant throughout the night looking for bodies. Picture the promenade decks where gay parties gathered, now gleaming red hot. Fires from the depths of the boat reflected hot and glaring on walls and ceilings. Angry, billowing clouds of smoke were smeared crimson from the reflected flames. Flames so hot and searing that huge girders and solid steel plates were twisted out of shape as though they had been cardboard. So hot that a steel lifeboat buckled and folded like tinfoil. In great ugly splotches, the paint had burnt off, leaving the bare, red, distorted metal. The giant hull, once an object of beauty, was a ghastly thing. It is enough to say, perhaps, that in the awful holocaust of fire, the souls of men and women were sorely tried. Some rose to the heights of glorious sacrifice. Others were found wanting and sank to the lowest depths of cowardice. So it is in all crises.
My grandfather, Stephen Wilson, he was a surfman in the Coast Guard. The one thing that always resonated with him, though, when he got to the shore, there was a boat full of some of the survivors, and there was a young boy, he thought to be about 14 years old, who had a lot of internal injuries, probably from jumping off of the ship. And he worked on him for quite some time. I think he said a few hours, and he ended up passing away. And he said, you save 100 people, but it's that one that you can't save that always stayed with him, you know, that boy that he couldn't save.
My uncle, Stanley Truax, he was a member of the Spring Lake First Aid for 75 years. The first person he came upon was a young girl who was burned over her whole body, and he said her clothes were all burned off. So he took his jacket off and wrapped it around her, and they had set up a first aid, like emergency station at the police station. So he drove her to there, and then he ran down, and there was just so many people going. He said it became a blur. He went out in the ocean and brought people into shore and went back out again. He said he was doing it for 6 hours.
It was my uncle, Captain William Eden, who came down from Merritt, Chapman, and Scott and towed that ship back to New York. My father took us up later on to see this ship, and by the time we saw it, it was black with smoke coming out of the windows that almost looked like hands trying to come out of the window. It was horrendous.
The ship took fire south of Seagirt, and it sailed up, and when they found out that the first officer found out the captain was dead, he tried to sail into New York, and the fire spread, and he anchored off of Seagirt, 2 miles out at sea. Governor A. Harry Moore deployed an African-American unit of what they were called the state militia, and he authorized them to patrol the beach to pick up any survivors and also the bodies that were floating in.
Well, on September 9th, 1934, when I was just 4 years old, I can remember looking at the newspapers. There were aerial photographs of the Morro Castle. We were standing on the boardwalk, and this big blackened ship and damaged lifeboats. As a kid, we wanted to get down to the water's edge and play in the sand like we usually did when we went to the ocean. But my mother said no. Well, it was obvious it was dangerous.
It was several weeks after the beaching down at Asbury Park by Convention Hall, was that there was leather in the hull of the ship, and my grandfather was a leather chemist, and they shot his buoy chair from the end of Convention Hall out to the beach ship, and they had to do it several times because the deck of the Morro Castle was still too hot for a human being to walk on it. But it was a big thing around here in this area. All families that lived here went to see it, went down there. I've always looked at all the newspaper clippings because I keep looking for where I was at that time.
My grandfather became fire chief in 1923, and in 1925 it became the first paid fire department in Asbury Park. And he was chief there for 26 years. And one of his biggest things that'll always be remembered for is the Morro Castle. And they told us about how they fought that fire off of Convention Hall for 7 days. It was very difficult for him to see all of those bodies. He had nightmares for a very long time, probably forever, over the horror that he saw on that ship.